Well, it's Kirby month, and as stated in the last video, all the videos I drop in April will be about this wonderful pink creature. In the first real deepest lore episode of this series, we will start by looking into the first Kirby game, Kirby's Dream Land, which was released on April 27th, 1992, 30 years ago this month. It told a rather simplistic story involving Kirby, a hero of the stars, taking on the gluttonous King Dedede, who had stolen all the food in Dreamland for his own consumption. It was a light, fluffy story that ended with the two taking each other on in a boxing ring. Kirby defeats Dedede, he saves all the food, end of story. At least, at that point. Like many other games we've discussed thus far, this one has been remade. Twice. The first time was in 1996, when it was partially remade and expanded upon into Kirby Superstar on the SNES. The second time was a remake of Superstar called Kirby Superstar Ultra on the Nintendo DS, which not only expanded the content of Superstar even more, but also created a direct sequel to the original story that readapted some parts of Dreamland that were cut out of the SNES version, making this, no question, the definitive Kirby's Dream Land experience. Plus, as I mentioned, Dreamland was expanded on with these remakes. Superstar Ultra is not just a retelling of the game, but actually a collection of 10 games and 5 sub-games. None of these games are particularly long themselves, but altogether they form a meaty package of Kirby gameplay and story. There's a lot going on in this game, and it ties pretty heavily into lore introduced in games released between 1992 and 1996, so today we'll only be discussing 2 of these games, Spring Breeze and Revenge of the King. Now, Spring Breeze is the actual remake of Dreamland. The story goes just as I described earlier. King Dedede steals all the food in Dreamland alongside 4 of the 5 sparkling stars that allow the citizens of Dreamland to harvest more. Kirby, of course, loves food, and so goes to get it all back. First, Kirby takes on Dedede's long-standing goons, Wispy Woods, Lololo and La and Kracko. With them out of the way, Kirby heads for Mount Dedede, where the Great King sits, waiting. The two stand as adversaries, though based on the boxing ring that Dedede has set up, complete with a cheering crowd for his battle with Kirby, I can't imagine this was their first time going head-to-head. The game ends with Dedede removed from his castle, and Kirby taking possession of the building, almost literally, to return the food to the populace and stand tall as the hero of Dreamland. Random fact, Lololo and La are actually canon immigrants from the Eggerland series, an old set of puzzle games released by HAL, but nothing about that series seems to be canon to the Kirby games, though if you want to hear me discuss them at some point, please let me know. Usually this is where I'd end things, but if we're going to be talking about the original Kirby's Dream Land, there is still one more very important part of the story I have yet to talk about. As mentioned earlier, Revenge of the King is a sub-game exclusive to Kirby Superstar Ultra that acts as a direct sequel to Spring Breeze. In this game, King Dedede wants vengeance on Kirby for his previous slights, once again stealing the sparkling stars in order to draw out his adversary for the sole purpose of revenge. As far as gameplay goes, Revenge of the King is based on the extra game of the original Dreamland. It replaces many of the enemies with stronger ones, makes all of the bosses more challenging, and even re-implements Kabula, a boss from the original Dreamland, as an extra challenge. This game also shows us that the starship is not a singular vehicle, but instead a coalescence of star energy, as seen in both this game, one is formed after Kirby collects 3 sparkling stars, and in Milky Way Wishes, where one is created from the power Kirby gained from traveling along the starry path. At the end of the game, when Kirby reaches Mount Dedede, the Mad King sends everything after the Pink Terror, up to and including his attendant, a bandana-wearing Waddle Dee with a spear. This specific soldier is known as Bandana D, and will become another major character in the franchise going forward. The two place a multitude of mini-bosses between Kirby and the center of the fortress, but as those foes fall one by one, Bandana D and King Dedede realize that they need to take care of this themselves. And once every minion, every challenge, including Bandana D, have been defeated, Kirby arrives back in the arena where he faced Dedede previously. But things feel different. The boxing arena is now surrounded by an electrified cage, and Dedede himself won't show until Kirby is willing to face him in equal combat, offering up the hammer copy ability that Kirby must take. Notably, Triple Deluxe and Planet Robobot imply that the hammer he uses in those titles was a gift from Dedede, possibly making this canonically the same hammer he would use throughout the rest of the series. When Dedede finally does appear, he was not his usual jovial self, but instead quite serious. The seats in the crowd were empty, outside the expectant Bandana D. The Great King has had an upgrade, replacing his old hammer with a more powerful mechanized one, and also wearing a metallic mask. This time, he meant business. But somehow, despite all of this preparation, Kirby still came forth as the victor. Dejected and once again removed from his castle, Dedede, Bandana Waddle Dee, and the remains of their army wander through the land, trying to figure out where they went wrong, and a way to move forward. This is a very important moment for Dedede as a character. While ancillary materials often push forward the idea of Dedede being the main villain of the Kirby series, that was only really true for the first few games. Going forward, Dedede will rarely be the villain. In most titles, he's allied with Kirby, possessed by an outside force, or acting in the express interests of Dreamland as a nation, even if that brings him into conflict with Kirby. After the events of Revenge of the King, Dedede is a changed man, and the future is better for it. And that's the end of this video. While Superstar and Ultra have many more sub-games to discuss, we have one more game to cover before a lot of that can really make sense. So next week, join me as we go through the story of the second mainline Kirby game, Kirby's Adventure, and its remake, Kirby Nightmare in Dreamland. I'll see you then.